We're going to start the book of Numbers tonight. If you're not there, you can be making your way in your Bibles over there. We'll try to cover the first 4 chapters tonight, and as you can probably guess from the title of the book, it's based upon the census, actually, I guess 2 censuses that were taken of the children of Israel. And question number 1 on your handout, start out with a thought question, which kind of revolves around these 4 chapters we're going to be studying tonight. The question is, how does your family operate? Are work responsibilities divided in your family? Now, I know that's obviously going to depend on if you're married, if you have children, and things like that. But for those of us who are work responsibilities in your family divided up, or were they divided up whenever you had children? Yes? Okay, I saw a meme, I don't remember if it was today or yesterday on Facebook, or as Dennis calls it, the devil's media. But it said, it was a marriage tip. This picture, and it was a marriage tip. It said, husbands, don't ask your wife what's for dinner while she's still mowing the yard. So, kind of thought about, dividing up the work responsibility thing. So generally speaking, within a family, work responsibilities are divided up, right? And why is that the case?
Because God said no.
Okay. Certainly according to divine pattern, but why else? Is there anything that's beneficial in dividing it up? So you wouldn't want to do the cooking around your house? Is that what you're saying? I don't know if you can cook as good as your wife. I'll acknowledge your cooking, but
I can't see dirt.
So if you can't wash dishes, is that what you're saying? Generally, when you think about the way that a family operates, generally responsibilities are divided up between husbands and wives and children. And first of all, it's, there's too much for one person to do. It's just too overwhelming for one person to have to take care of everything within a family. And then the second thing is, generally when you divide things up, you get more accomplished, don't you? You get less burnout, you get you invest time, but it's not so much all on one person, and so you're able to accomplish more than one thing. It's interesting, you read the first 4 chapters here of the book of Numbers. Now, obviously, we're talking about counting, which in and of itself isn't that exciting, I know. But there was a reason why these people were numbered and why they were divided, and part of it had to do with the different responsibilities that were given to the people themselves. And so we're not going to be able, again, to read all this chapter, all these chapters. Some of them have to do with just a lot of names, so we're going to kind of skip back and forth. But what you'll find in chapter 1 in the beginning is that God commanded the children of Israel, commanded Moses to number the children of Israel, to take a census of them. And it wasn't something that he was required in and of himself to do, just by himself. In fact, we read about people who were assigned to help him here. In verse 4, it says in Numbers 1, "And with you there shall be a man from every tribe, each one of the head of his father's house." And then in verse 16, well, the next few verses gives the names of those men, but in verse 16 it says, "These were chosen from the congregation, leaders of their father's tribes, heads of the division in Israel." And so, who was, question number 2 on your handout here, who was supposed to help Aaron and Moses with this census? Yeah, there was one man from every tribe, and those men from that tribe were supposed to be the leaders within their tribes. You know, I think sometimes, at least in my mind, when I think about the children of Israel and, you know, Moses being the leader, I kind of think about him, well, he was, you know, he's all out here by himself. You know, he had to do everything by himself and, you know, all this responsibility on him. And there was a tremendous burden and responsibility that was placed upon him as the leader. But we also have to understand that there were a lot of other leaders within Israel themselves. And so when God gives the assignment here for the children of Israel to be numbered, he doesn't just say, well, you got to take care of it all by yourself, Moses. There's one man from every tribe that is picked out. He's kind of the head of that tribe over the divisions of the family. And obviously they're of great assistance in helping accomplish what God commands here. So what were these newly appointed leaders supposed to do? Somebody read verses 17 through 19 for us here, Numbers chapter 1.
Then Moses and Aaron took these men who had been mentioned by name, and they assembled all the congregation together on the first day of the second month, and they decided their ancestors by family, by their father's house, according to their names, 20 years old and above, each one individually as the Lord commanded Moses, so he numbered them in the wilderness of Sinai.
Okay, so what were these appointed leaders supposed to do? What was their responsibility?
Assemble the congregation together on the first day of the second month, and for them to declare their, Bible says, pedigree or their heritage.
Yeah, so basically these guys who were each in charge of a tribe, their job was to assemble all their whole tribe together, and then they were supposed to go through that tribe and register. Who were they supposed to register? Who were we numbering? Did they count everybody?
20 years old and above.
Yeah, first of all, it was only the males, right? And not every male, but only those who were 20 years and older. And why is that the case? Why were they just counting the males and just counting from 20 years old and up? Yeah, they were getting ready to go to war, weren't they? Remember, they're getting ready to go into the land of Canaan and conquer the promised land. And so God commands this census to be taken of the number of men, number of able-bodied men that are present within each tribe.
Now, the tribe of Levi, they numbered from 20 to 50. Why did you put a top age on this?
I don't know.
If
Yeah.
you're a man, you're 20, you can go to war.
Yeah, it just said in verse 3, and I think obviously there's going to be some exceptions to that. Not everybody who's 20 years old and older is going to have the ability to go. Some would have mental defects, some would have physical defects. But it does clarify, I think there in verse 3, from 20 years old and above, all who are able to go to war in Israel. So obviously, I'd say there's probably the age hindered them from being able to participate and fight in this war. But the purpose of the numbering was, again, to establish the number of soldiers within the army of Israel. And so every person in charge of their tribe had the responsibility of assembling their tribe and then of registering or writing down or numbering the names of all these men who had the ability to fight in this war. And of course, you know, there's a good principle when you think about that. Every able-bodied man was expected to fight, wasn't he? I mean, you think about God's army today, God's spiritual army today. Who's supposed to be fighting? Just the elders? You know, just the deacons? No. It's every able-bodied man, right? Every person who has the ability. So question number 4, let's read. Somebody read verses 45 and 46 for us.
So were all those that were numbered of the children of Israel by the house of their fathers, from 20 years old and up, all that were able to go forth to the war of Israel. Even all they that were numbered were 600,000 and 3,550.
Okay, so 600, the total from these tribes was 603,550. Now, I want to stop for just a moment and, you know, again, I think sometimes when we talk about Israel and Moses, you know, being responsible for this group of people, we think, well, this was 100 or 200 people, you know, that Moses was trying to lead and to take care of. But if there's over 600,000 men, 20 years old and up, that's just the men, and that's not all the men, that's just 20 years old and above who are able to fight. What do you think the possibility of the total number of the children of Israel would have been? Yeah, I would say, you know, you're talking anywhere from 2 to 4 million people that Moses is leading around out here in the middle of nowhere and having to, you know, settle all these fights, take care of all their needs, and make sure everybody has food, make sure everybody's safe. And so it gives you a kind of an indication. Remember, whenever they go down into Egypt, there's only about 70 of them that go down. But remember God's promise to Abraham? You remember what he said that he would do to his seed? Well, when they come out, there's 2 to 4 million of them. And so they've grown, you know, tremendously from the time that they went down into Egypt, from the time that they come back out. And so you can see God fulfilling these promises that he made to Abraham. Question number 5. So what do you think would have happened if Moses and Aaron had to do this all by themselves? Well, they might have. I think they would eventually got done, don't you? But they'd still be counting. That's a long way to count for 2 people, isn't it? But it would have been an overwhelming task, wouldn't it? You know, for Moses or even for Aaron, just to try to take them on itself. And it would have taken a lot longer than what it did. And so again, you kind of see this benefit of the idea of, you know, dividing up work responsibilities and everybody doing their part. So question number 6 is, are there any benefits that come from counting?
There is if you're going to war.
Okay, and what would that be?
We, first of all, maybe to figure out whether you could be the winner or not.
Yeah?
Maybe strategy-wise, where you need to place certain people at certain times. We take a census every 10 years now for the purposes of receiving money to know what the population of each town is, that kind of stuff. So logistically speaking, who needs to get what?
Yeah. And so the important thing to remember about this is, number 1, this is something God commanded Moses to do. You know, Moses didn't take it on himself to start counting the numbers. But when you think of military, which is what they were getting ready to do, there's a great benefit in knowing the number of people that you have, right? And having them divided into different groups, as they're going to be divided by tribes here. And so I think that would certainly have come into play. What about, put an example down here, like a shepherd numbering his sheep. You know, is there any advantage in a shepherd knowing how many sheep he has? Yeah, I mean, a lot of it's just, you know, common sense, right? Is your flock increasing or decreasing? Well, you don't know that if you don't know how many you have, do you? You never count them. And a lot of it had to do also, as you get toward the end of the book of Numbers, the inheritance that was going to be given in the promised land. Remember, it was divided by family and it was divided by tribe. And based upon how big your tribe was, depended upon how much land God had in mind for them. Ultimately, they cast lots, but the places that God had in mind for them. And so, yeah, there was an advantage in numbering the people at this time. Question number 7. So, who was not included in this total count? Let's read. Somebody read verses 47 through 51 for us.
But the Levites, after the tribe of their fathers, were not numbered among them. For the Lord had spoken unto Moses, saying, Only thou shalt not number the tribe of Levi, neither take the son of them among the children of Israel. But thou shalt appoint the Levites over the tabernacle of the testimony, and over all the vessels thereof,
Okay, so who wasn't included in the total count? Yeah, the Levites. And why was that?
They're God's. He chose them.
Okay, did they have to fight?
No,
They have to go to war?
no.
Why not?
They're God's work.
Yeah, they had a special job. God had a special job for them, and what was that job?
Tabernacle.
Yeah, it was taking care of the tabernacle. So God had, instead of them going out here and fighting, God had a different work in mind for them, a spiritual task or spiritual service involved in the tabernacle. We'll talk a little bit later about what all that entailed. So when we get over into chapter 2, we basically read about the different tribes and the leaders of those tribes, and then we read about whenever they sat down and established camp, God had a pattern in mind for them. They didn't just randomly start throwing up tents and everybody went where they want, but there was a pattern that God outlined for them to follow. And so there were certain tribes that were supposed to camp on the east side of the tabernacle. There were certain that were supposed to camp on the west and the north and the south. And so question number 8 deals with that. We're not going to read all of this, but hopefully you've looked ahead and maybe you figured some of these out. But which tribes were told to camp on the east side of the tabernacle? 3 tribes.
Judah,
Yes?
Joseph,
Issachar? One more. And Zebulon. Okay? And then how about on the south side? 3 tribes on the south side. There you go. Reuben, Simeon, and Gad. And what about the west side? 3 more.
Ephraim,
Yes?
Manasseh, Benjamin,
There you go. And finally the north side, the last 3 here.
Dan, Asher, Naphtali.
Okay, good job. That was painful, wasn't it? He's like a speed reader over there or something, yeah. So everybody had a position within the camp where they were supposed to set up. They couldn't just randomly walk to whichever side they wanted and set up and camp there. And then the Levites, of course, we didn't read about them. Remember, they're not involved. They're not obligated to fight within these wars, but they had a special place within that camp. Somebody read verse 17 there in chapter 2.
In the tabernacle of the congregation shall sit forward with the camp of the Levites in the midst of the camp. As they encamp, so shall they sit forward, every man in his place by their stand.
Okay, so where were the Levites supposed to camp? Right in the middle, right? And what was in the middle?
Tabernacle.
The tabernacle. And so why do you think that would be the case? Why do you think God designed it like this and set it up like this? Can you see any advantages in it? Okay, certainly the Levites need to be close, right, to the tabernacle because that was their responsibility. What about the tribes, the way that they were situated?
They protected them, right? They had certain.
Yeah,
The other tribe protected them.
right. And so the idea I think you see is what the most important thing in the camp, where do you usually put it? Put it right in the middle, don't you? And so when you think about Israel and you think about, what was the most important thing to them, well, it was God. It was the tabernacle, wasn't it? It was the worship of God. It was the offering of these sacrifices. And the fact that every tribe, was positioned around this tabernacle, which tribe was the closest? Yeah, forget Levi. I know they were right there. What was the next closest tribe? That's right, all of them, right? So no one was any farther from the worship or the service of God than anybody else. And I don't think God designed that and set it up by accident, but everybody had as much free access as the next person. Everybody was as close to all the center, the activity, the worship, the things that was going on as the next. And so I think God was trying to teach them, the importance of putting Him in the middle of everything. When we think about, our service for God, we think about serving in the army of God. Everything's supposed to revolve around Him. He's supposed to be the center of our activities. And so God placed the tabernacle and the Levites right in the middle. We're going to skip over number 10 here. We're going to put it down in the next section. But when you get into chapter 3, we learn a little bit more about the Levites and why it is that God chose them. Let's go over to chapter 3 here, and somebody read verses 11 through 13 for us.
And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, And I, behold, I have taken the Levites from among the children of Israel, instead of all the firstborn that openeth the matrix among the children of Israel. Therefore the Levites shall be mine. Because all the firstborn are mine, for on the day that I smote all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, I hallowed unto me all the firstborn in Israel, both man and beast. Mine they shall be, I am the Lord.
Okay, so why does God say that the Levites were His? Question 11.
Took them instead of the firstborn.
Yeah, it goes back to the 10th and the final plague in Egypt, right? Remember the death of the firstborn? And so God spared the firstborn of Israel, all those who put the blood of the lamb on the posts of the door of their houses. The firstborn was spared. And so God, because God saved them, God said, they're mine. They belong to me. He laid claim to them. And what happens is whenever you get over here to the establishment of the tabernacle and the marching in the land of Canaan, God says, here's what I'm going to do. Instead of every firstborn male, from all these different tribes all the way around belonging to me, I'm just going to take the tribe of Levi. I'm going to allow the Levites to be substituted for the firstborn. And so you think about, again, going back, we talked about this total number here, but can you imagine, we now have Aaron, who's the high priest. We've already read about the deaths of Nadab and Abihu. 2 of his sons have died. How many sons does he have left? Does anybody know? 2. So you basically got Aaron and you've got his 2 sons to take care of the tabernacle and the needs of 2 to 4 million people involving sacrifice and worship of God. That would be almost impossible, wouldn't it? And so what God does is He says, I'm going to choose the Levites, I'm going to use them, and I'm going to institute them into the service of the tabernacle, and they belong to me because I'm going to substitute them for all these firstborn that I saved while you guys were in Israel. And so we read about them. Question number 12 here, we read about the 3 different divisions of them. Each one had a particular job. I don't have time to go through all this, but if you look at the Gershonites, they had certain responsibilities. Somebody look at verse 26. Tell me what those responsibilities were.
Tent covering, curtains.
Yeah, basically their job. Now again, you're having all these Levites, and God is instituting them into the service of the tabernacle. But their job was to take care of all the curtains and the coverings of the tabernacle, the ropes that would go with it. Remember, the courtyard itself was even set up, and then you had all the 4 different coverings that went over the tabernacle itself. And so they were responsible for taking care of those. And then you have the Kohathites, and I think in verse 31 there in chapter 3, we read about their responsibilities. What were they?
Table, lampstand,
Yeah, basically all the inner objects of the tabernacle, you know, all the structures, all the utensils, their job was to take care of those things, to move them, to set them up, to take them down, things like that. And then you have the last one, the Merarites, and what was their responsibility? 36 and 37 there.
The wood, back bars, the pillars, all that stuff.
Yeah, so all the boards, remember they had boards that were overlaid with metals, they had sockets, they had poles, they had pegs that linked all these things together. Their job was taking care of those things, transporting them, helping them set them up, helping take them down, and things of that nature. And so God chooses the Levites, He divides up the different responsibilities of the tabernacle, and He gives them to different families throughout that tribe. So here's a good thought. We're kind of talking about, you know, the idea of dividing up responsibility and how that helps out in the long run. Let's go back to question 10 here. Do you think it's easy for people to avoid being responsible in large groups? Let's ask that. You say yes or no? Okay, why is that? Okay, first of all, you got a lot of different bodies, right? You got a lot of different people. But how can you contribute to a person, you know, being irresponsible in a large group?
Making assignment.
Yeah, by not making an assignment, right? So you ever have? I remember in school, I always hated it when you had these big groups. They divide you up and they put you in a big group. Say, well, you got this project, and here's your grade. And you always have that one guy or that one girl who says, all right, you guys do it all. You know, I'm not going to do anything. Well, what if you don't assign somebody a certain work or a certain task? That's pretty easy for them to be irresponsible. It's pretty easy for them to kind of blend in the mass and, you know, not really do anything. And so I think that's what God was trying to avoid here. You know, every family had their division. They had a responsibility of work that they were supposed to do. And so what happens, question 13 here, what happens when people don't follow through on their responsibilities? What does that do?
Usually nothing gets done.
Yeah, it really puts the whole operation in limbo, doesn't it? Because you have to go back and you have to do the job that they didn't do, that they were supposed to do. And so it really jeopardizes the whole operation itself. It causes more work for other people. And so everybody was depending upon everybody else to do their part in all of this. We don't have time. We got like 3 or 4 minutes left, so we'll kind of run through the end of this real quickly here. God gives a command to Moses concerning the firstborn males, and that was to count them. And the number that they end up with is 22,273. You go back and you look at the Levites only numbered 22,000. And so what happened is you had 273 people that were of the firstborn that belonged to God, that you didn't have a Levite that you could exchange them for. Now we might look at that and say, well, let's just call it good, right? Let's just call it good. But you have the principle laid down in the scripture, you know, everybody has to be redeemed properly. And so what happens is the 273 people that are left over, there's a redemption money that has to be paid for them. I think it was 5 shekels of silver, if I remember right. One commentary I read said that would have been, take it all together, would have been equal to about 35 pounds of silver by the time everybody paid their redemption money. That money was then given to Aaron and to the service of the tabernacle to take care of whatever needed to be accomplished there. We get into chapter 4. You read a lot about the sons of Kohath, and of course the sons of Kohath were the guys who had to take care of the inner sanctuary of the tabernacle itself. They had to take care of all those objects. And was there any danger involved in that? Yeah, that they were in charge of carrying, you know, the ark and the table and the altar and all these utensils. But what were they not allowed to do? Do you remember? Look at verse 15 there in chapter 4, I think. Yeah, they couldn't touch it. And so what Aaron and his sons, they were responsible for going in and covering all these things up and wrapping them up, so to speak. And then the sons of Kohath, they couldn't go in and just look around. You know, they weren't allowed to go in and watch and see all these things. But after they were covered up and packed up, then their job was to go in and to move them and to transport them. And so they did have a very treacherous job, because as we've seen in different stories throughout the Bible, if they violated that, the penalty for that was death. And then you have Eleazar, which is one of Aaron's sons, and his responsibility in verse 16, you'll read there, he basically had to oversee and supervise everything that went on there in the tabernacle itself. He's also personally responsible for getting the oil prepared for the lampstand, also preparing the incense, offering the daily grain offering, and then the anointing oil. And so the last question there, number 19, is how is more accomplished when people have specific tasks? Yeah, there's nobody, you know, sometimes I think, and this is a good lesson I think for us as a church, sometimes we say, well, you know, this is our job. This is the work that God has given us to do. And if I don't have a specific job that I'm doing or a specific task in mind, I might think, well, somebody else takes care of that, right? Or, you know, somebody else can do that, and I'll concentrate on this. And I think what you learn in all this is, you know, God divvied up the responsibility, took everybody, you know, being accountable, stepping up and doing their part in order for things to function and work as they should. And when they didn't do that, you'll read about times in Israel when they didn't do what they were supposed to do. Created problems, didn't it? It was extra work for other people. There was a lot of stress that was laid on certain individuals, you know, a lot of overworking that went on, a lot of responsibility to be handled. And so the lesson for us is I think all of us need to be sure we're doing our part. You know, whatever our responsibility is in the church, we need to be sure that we know what that is, and we need to be accomplishing that work. Anybody have any other thoughts or comments? Yes, sir.
Do we have any idea of how many times the tabernacle was put up, taken down over?
No, that'd be interesting. That'd be interesting to know. You know, we do know sometimes it was days, sometimes it stood for months, sometimes it stood for years. But I don't know. I've never actually gone through and counted the number of times that at least we have recorded. That would be an interesting. Somebody do that for us, okay? Dennis, I'm gonna be specific. I'm gonna be specific. I'll give you some responsibility here. No, that would be an interesting thing to know. In fact.